guys, my name is John, and you listen to the Tech Leader Pro podcast. It is week 45 of 2024, Sunday the 10th of November. You're very welcome, hope you had a nice week. So last week I was totally overwhelmed, hence I missed an episode. As we are coming to the end of the year, I am working hard to meet many project deadlines. I'm sure most of you guys are doing the same. This week I want to explain to you why I believe DEI training is a waste of time. It comes off the back of me having to attend compulsory training this week in the company where I work. For those that don't know, DEI stands for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion. In principle, this is a noble cause. The idea is to train us not to treat people differently based on their gender, colour, age, or any other attribute. We learned about many principles such as covering, when a person covers up aspects of themselves in order to fit in at work, therefore restricting them from bringing their, quote, true self to work. In reality, we all present a professional persona that is different from our true selves. I think we all do this, and I think this is kind of naive to think that we don't. To be professional, we must often leave topics at home like personal issues, political beliefs, or any other topics that are likely to upset or annoy our colleagues. This is just part of being a grown-up. Basically, we're all, quote, covering, whether we admit it or not. Secondly, the reality is we all have some bias. Bias is natural, and it is a survival instinct. If our ancestors got attacked by a certain animal type on a regular basis, for example, they became biased against that animal pretty quickly. Hence I call it a survival instinct. It's something that we all do naturally, whether we like to admit it or not. In modern times, we are not that different. During an interview process, for example, you will be judged, and that judgment will often include some bias. And yes, that is unfair. Pretending that bias does not exist, however, is simply that, pretending. Hence I believe it is naive to think that we can attend some basic training and that's going to remove us from our bias. DEI initiatives, while noble in intent, simply tries to suppress bias rather than removing it. In reality, what it's doing is it's teaching managers to hide their bias so that they don't get into trouble in terms of legalities or other issues. But the reality is you cannot remove it. It is an innate part of being a human being. We are all biased. As a leader, it is much better to acknowledge your bias and to challenge it internally, as bias can create blind spots, which is bad for you. Reassess your bias on a regular basis. Is it still valid? Are there decent sample sizes to justify it? Or is it all based on your personal experience that may be flawed? Challenge bias, but don't pretend you can remove it completely, because you can't. And remember, others are biased towards you also, for all kinds of unfair reasons. That is life. And yes, it's unfair, but according to my philosophy, life is not fair. So apart from worrying about bias and DEI this week, what else did I do? In terms of media that I've been enjoying recently, I finally got around to finishing Maelstrom by Peter Watts, which is part 2 of his Rifter series. While I really enjoyed his first book in this series, which is called Starfish, I have very mixed feelings about Maelstrom. In the first book, we primarily focused on the central character, Lenny Clark, who in my mind was a very fascinating character. A real anti-hero, very flawed, very complex, really interesting character. And for some reason in the second book, she kind of drifted into the background. She became almost this character who was ghosting in and out of the story. And there was a whole host of other characters that were brought in instead. None of which I found that interesting, to be frank, and I found myself just dipping in and out of this book and really struggled to finish it. I was reading other books at the same time and it never really hooked me. And it's strange, you have a really great character, but you don't use that character and instead you bring in a cast of minor characters. And honestly speaking, I was finding it hard to keep track of all these different minor characters and, I just wasn't invested in them at all. And it was only towards the end where, it started to come together a little bit. But honestly speaking, I really struggled through this one, guys, and I do want to continue with the series because I really like Peter Watts. There's another 2 books to go. I've already picked up a second-hand copy of the third one from eBay, By the way, these books are very hard to get, and they're out of print. So the only way I can see them available is via the original Tor hardbacks on eBay. They're quite expensive. But I just love that book so much, the first one, and I'm still holding out a little bit of hope that the series will get better. But yeah, the second one for me was a bit of a miss. But I love Peter Watts, and I think he's a brilliant writer. And if you're interested in exploring his work, I would recommend starting with Blindsight, which is by far his strongest book so far that I've read, which is a First Encounter story, science fiction story. It's really, really cool. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, guys. I hope you have a great week. I hope, like me, if you've got any deadlines that are approaching rapidly towards the end of the year, that you meet those with success. Talk to you next time. Take care.